This is a qualitative study of the kind of professional development for principals that should or could be implemented by the Los Altos School District. This study naturally focuses on principals. Principals are key players in schools. No other person has as much contact with as wide a range of people in a school as they do. They touch children, of course, teachers, parents, staff, administrators, and members of the community. They are supervisors of teachers, boosters of their schools, advocates for every child, creators and implementers of programs, and they are the face of public education. Their role is vast and important. Their success is key to a school's goal of educating every child. But to be successful, principals, just like lawyers, doctors, engineers, accountants, and other licensed and certified professionals, need ongoing professional development for two reasons. Firstly, to fill any gaps in their knowledge or skills, and secondly, to keep abreast of new developments in the theory or practice of education. In fact, given the hugely important task of educating our children, it's surprising that principals don't have a mandatory annual professional development requirement, just like other professionals do. Given the importance of principals, one would expect that a high-performing school district like Los Altos School District would have a robust professional development program for their principals, but they don't. So what would or could such a program look like? So what does the research show? The literature on professional development for principals suggests two things. One, there is value in having trained and knowledgeable principals, and two, professional development is essential for creating and maintaining trained and knowledgeable principals. In 1987, the Commission on Excellence in Education issued a report, Leaders for America's Schools, which made 8 recommendations, one of which was that professional development activities should be an integral component of the careers of professors of education administration and practicing administrators. But even before that, prior to the Civil War, one of Horace Mann's 6 principles was that education should be the province of professionally trained leaders. More recently, 3 studies have looked into the professional development for principals, either as their main subject or as a component. Principal Professional Development, New Operations for Renewed State Focus, is by Courtney Rowland of the Education Policy Center at the American Institutes for Research. Supporting Principal Learning, Key Features of Effective Programs by Lieb Sucher, Ann Podolsky, and Danny Espinoza of the Learning Policy Institute at Stanford. And Empowered Educators, How High-Performing Systems Shape Teacher Quality Around the World by Linda Darling-Hammond at the Learning Policy Institute and 8 other academics in Chapter 5. There is some dispute whether or not specific features of a professional development program have much of an effect on student learning. Linda Darling-Hammond and others, in a review of research on developing successful principals, merely says that more research is needed to provide empirical evidence that features of a professional development program, despite apparent consensus, actually improve student outcomes. Another study conducted by the Institute of Education Sciences concludes that if there is any effect, it is small. But perhaps the most telling endorsement of robust professional development for principals is how Singapore, Shanghai, Finland, Canada, and Australia approach the issue. They provide career paths for teachers to take on a leadership role. Advancement is tied to teacher learning, and leadership development is intentional. One clear future direction for research is to tie specific programs and features to outcomes which are not measured by standardized tests such as PISA. Let's first look at the context of the study and then who were the participants. The Los Altos School District is a medium-sized elementary K-8 school district in Silicon Valley. LASD comprises 7 elementary schools, K-6, and 2 junior high schools of 7-8. It has roughly 4,000 students, 250 teachers, 9 principals, and 4 senior staff, plus a superintendent. All LASD schools have been California Distinguished Schools or National Blue Ribbon Schools at one time or another. Demographically, about 15% of LASD students are not performing as well as they could. 78% of them are white or Asian, 8% Latinx, less than 1% Black, and 13% other. About 13% have English as a second language. We can look at professional development for principals in LASD from a number of different angles. Do similar programs exist? And what are the principal performance and evaluation standards? LASD has a professional development program for teachers, which consists of dedicated collaboration time each week for half a day, in-house and outside seminars, classes, and conferences, stipends for travel to out-of-state teaching institutes during the summer, for instance, and some coaching and mentoring. This program has been in effect for several years now and is universally appreciated by teachers, so there is a successful model which might be applied to principals. What standards apply for principals? And where are there gaps between what is expected and what a principal knows? A quasi-national standard exists called the Educational Leadership Policy Standard, ISLLC 2008, which has been adopted by the National Policy Board for Educational Administration. A companion guide for implementing those standards also exists. California has a variant of that. It's called the California Professional Standards for Educational Leaders and was published in 2014. All told, there are 19 standards in 6 different categories. So who were the participants in this study? There are 3 categories. Firstly, there's the subject of the study themselves, the principals. Secondly, this is the superintendent and his senior staff. And thirdly, the researcher, myself. Since there are only 9 principals in Los Altos School District, no sampling was necessary for a survey. All were invited to participate anonymously, and 7 out of the 9 did so. 1 senior staff member was interviewed, and the superintendent was kept informed of the study, and he was neutral, neither supporting nor opposing it. I did the interviews myself, and I'm pursuing the question of whether or not there was a structural issue in LASD which caused 3 women principals to leave. After the interviews, I concluded that was not the case, and I pivoted the study to study the professional development of principals. I felt that the anonymity was sufficient to overcome any reluctance to participate fully, and I also respected the intelligence and experience of the principals, so I kept my views to myself. I'm on the board of the Los Altos School District, and that means I come with 2 pieces of baggage. I can be viewed sort of as the boss of the principal's boss. The sort of refers to the difference between the perception of a board member as all-knowing, all-seeing, and all-powerful to the reality. Board members are strongly discouraged from involving themselves in operational issues as opposed to policy issues. Operational issues are the purview of the superintendent and not the board. And the superintendent is the board's only hire. Secondly, I've been elected by members of the public. I'm the chosen one, twice, as a matter of fact. And this lends a certain gravitas that's not shared by other participants. Speaking of gravitas, I'm a doctoral candidate in education leadership, and except for 1 other principal, all the others have, quote, just a master's degree. I am a white, privileged male in a parent population that can be described as Asian or white, educated, privileged, and unfortunately also feeling entitled. But this, except for the entitled part, also describes principals. Half of them are male, 7 are white, 1 is half Latino, half white, and 1 of them is Indian. I promised confidentiality, and I did not violate my promise. I used 2 methods of gathering data: interviews and a survey. The interviews were conducted with the purpose of answering a question. Does LASD have a structural problem which led to the resignation of 3 strong women principals? Since all the principals were very familiar with the incidents and I didn't want to influence their views, I conducted the face-to-face interviews unstructured and open-ended. With the permission of the interviewee, I recorded the interviews using Otter on my smartphone, and Otter automatically transcribed the interview. I also took handwritten notes. Since we have existing strong women principals, it's unlikely that there exists a structural issue which led to the resignation of 3 strong women principals. I concluded that it was more likely that the principal's style clashed with a small group of parents than anything else. And so I pivoted to a topic that was brought up in the interviews, and that was the lack of professional development for principals. The second data collection method I used was a survey. 10 questions were sent to 9 principals, and 7 returned the survey. I used SurveyMonkey to answer the question, what professional development do you, the principal, think that you need? Those 10 questions fell into 3 major categories. The first was the education level and experience of the principal. The second one was whether standards were met or not. And the third one was what beyond the standards did the principals think that they needed. The answers were coded manually, and what stood out was all principals expressed an interest and value of relationships. 2 of them mentioned stress and self-care as important issues. 4 of them mentioned the value of communication skills. 4 of them also mentioned the value of understanding human psychology. All of them expressed an interest in and value of the California Professional Standards for Education Leaders, CEPSEL. And 3 of them expressed an interest in mentoring and coaching. What conclusions can we come to, and what are the limitations of this study? A major goal of the study was to start the conversation about creating a professional learning community for principals in much the same way that a professional learning community was created for teachers. And already there are signs that this is occurring. Part of that conversation has to be answering the question of how much of the CEPSEL standard do we want principals actually to meet. The standard or the set of standards is so broad and so deep that it's unreasonable to expect a principal to meet all of the standard. Note that engaging in an activity which falls underneath a particular standard is not the same as meeting the goal that's implied by that standard. What the research has revealed is that creating a professional learning community for principals is not enough. A useful and practical way has to be found to measure the effects of the principal learning community. And that itself is a significant undertaking. The Massachusetts Consortium in Innovative Educational Assessment has a model that LASD could implement. How much of that model to implement and when to implement that model are topics which need to be discussed. As always, funding is an issue. It will cost probably $1.5 billion to implement this per year. And lastly, the entire community has to agree on what the definition of success means. This is a qualitative study of the kind of professional development for principals that should or could be implemented by the Los Altos School District.